you can hack many exams. By hacking, I don't mean cheating. I really mean you can get the most out of it with half the effort than people usually spend. And that is what it's all about.
Hi, and welcome back to the German Learning Lab, our podcast on learning German. I'm Alessio, and with me is my co-host, Michael. Hi, Michael. Are you excited about our topic today?
Hey, Alessio. Hey, audience. Yeah, absolutely. It's such a beautiful and fascinating topic that everybody wants to talk about it. Let's go.
I'm happy you're here with me because our topic today is language exams, language certificates. And it's not my favorite topic. I mean, I don't like exams personally, but Michael, you're a big fan of exams, one of your favorite pastimes, and an expert on the topic. So I really look forward to discuss this topic with you. We will take the perspective of teachers too later, but maybe we can start with our perspective as learners. If I remember correctly, you have taken a lot of language exams yourself as a learner in your life, right?
Well, I took many, many language classes, and at times they had exams at the end, and they were of different nature. Some were self-made, others were official. But I've generally taken many exams in other fields, and I have a very clear understanding how exams work.
How many language exams have you taken? How many languages?
I always say I've taken 20 language courses over the last 30 years in 15 different languages, but that should not give the impression that I am fluent in any of these. I studied them. Studying doesn't necessarily mean being able to use them, right? It means really analyzing, understanding. And for my studies, which were Turkish studies, I had to do at least 10 languages, like Old Turkish, which was in rune script, or Old Mongolian, beautiful stuff about Genghis Khan and stuff. But I also did French, Russian, Spanish, all these things. Polish is a language I actually am able to understand still after 20 years of not using it. And English and German. These are 3 languages I'm fine with, but the rest is really intellectual knowledge and an understanding of how they basically work. Unlike you, no? How many languages do you speak? You're actually a polyglot, right?
Fluently, I'd say 5, but I haven't taken a lot of exams, only when I was forced to. So if I'm not forced to take an exam, I usually don't. So I had to take exams in French and Spanish at the university. For example, I never took an English exam. I don't know which level of English I am. I don't have any certificate in English, so
Then we can continue.
I'm officially unable to speak English. And for German, I took exams only when I moved to Berlin. I came here without speaking German. And my plan was to learn German while studying in a master degree at the university. I went to the Humboldt University and I told them my plan. And they told me, well, actually, no, you need the C1 just for your application. And so I had to very quickly learn for that certificate in order to present my application and then get the C2 in order to be accepted. But if it were for me, I wouldn't take any exam. I don't like them. But you took exams like, do I remember correctly, like in Turkish, maybe in Polish?
In Polish, possibly. It's so long ago. But Turkish, yeah, I got the Turkikunst, like a Latinum for Turkish. Let's say it's
Okay.
B1, not to be too generous with this. Might be B2 back then. I also took some Cambridge First Certificate, which is possibly B1 30 years ago, that I remember still, and I was excited going there. I drove 1.5 hours to the examination center, and luckily I passed. This is the 2 I remember. I have more experience preparing people for exams and seeing how they perform and understanding the exam itself. And again, many little exams, of course.
We'll get to preparing students in a second because I think our listeners are very interested in our perspective as coaches and teachers. But I remember some time ago we had a conversation where I was complaining about how fake language exams are, how they do not correspond to any actual language skills, how they are a perverse game or something. I was having a rant of this sort. And you offered a different perspective, something like actually a game you had fun playing. Do you remember?
I know my attitude towards exams, and I also know this criticism, and to an extent I have to agree, of course, but I don't think that's necessarily what exams are made for. So I understand you need some kind of agreement. Okay, that person has at least put this and that amount of effort into learning the language. It gives me a rough indication of where they are. I wouldn't make this the sole source of my judgment. If I were to hire you, I would always simply have a conversation with you in German and judge by that. Can you understand me? Can we have a proper conversation? If not, then no language certificate in the world would get you the job. But of course, I see it as a sport as well. You can hack many exams. By hacking, I don't mean cheating. I really mean you can get the most out of it with half the effort than people usually spend. And it's just fun to see how the mind of the creator of that exam works. It's very visible in these exercises. And hacking that, playing with that I really enjoy. And doesn't mean it's always easy and you will definitely pass that exam. That would be a wrong promise because that depends on many, many factors that we might touch today as well. Yeah. So I wouldn't be too philosophical about exams. Like a menu in a restaurant is not the food, right? So an exam is not the language skill per se, but it shows certain skills. So they're not worthless. Yeah.
No, they're not. But I remember exactly this part of our conversation because I was seeing exams more like a necessary evil kind of thing. And I remember I perceived your approach as if playing a game, a meaningful game, as you said, is not a game in the sense that it has no relation to language skills, but more like its own thing. And you have not to cheat, but to understand the rules of the game and how to play it. And I think that if I had that approach many years ago when I had to take those exams, maybe I could have had more fun with them. So that's why it popped to mind and I wanted to share with the listeners, right? Try to have Michael's approach to exams, so to see them as games instead of mine.
Well, it's a different game if your life depends on it, right? So often your migration status depends on it, and then it's easy to talk and then sit in that exam and sweat. Yeah. Oh, is it right or not? I've been in situations where I reached in my exam and just 5 meters from the desk where I left it, I was afraid, did I really answer it correctly or not? Because it was the end of my apprenticeship and it was really important to pass this, to finish this stuff. And then I just left it and it was fine enough. But man, that's a different feeling, right?
Yes. You cannot take all the pressure out of it. But yeah, approaching it as an important game, like Squid Game, like the Korean TV show. I mean, your life can depend on it, but it's still a game. Instead of seeing it as a bureaucratical, meaningless torture device. So my advice is try to take this game-like approach. Maybe you have more fun.
And we talk about the strategies, how to ease the pain, right? The psychological element of it to maybe ease the stress.
Yeah, I would like to talk about psychology of language exams, German exams.
The one part was already the fear that is just natural. It's just part of it, but it's also made up. Ultimately, the price I would have paid, for example, for not passing this final exam would have been to spend another half a year somewhere else. I wouldn't have died or I wouldn't have gone bankrupt. But of course, it's 6 months, but I was young. I was 20 years old. In my mind, I made it much bigger than what it actually was. So that was my personal experience. On the other hand, as an exam taker, I knew I was good at it because I understood the game. So I always kind of enjoyed this and said, okay, how much can I squeeze out of it?
Yeah, I see what you're saying. We can talk about these psychological aspects now, and then we move into more practical advice, because I think it's important. Similar to your experience, I was used to exams also because of university and so on. So the part of stress, of psychological stress and anxiety wasn't something so hard for me to overcome. But as a coach, I noticed in many of my students how this pressure takes a heavy burden on their exam preparation and also exam performance. So maybe we can talk about strategies on how to cope with that. What is the most important advice you would give to cope with that kind of pressure?
Well, the best advice for any exam is prepare. Second best is prepare. Third best is prepare.
The third one is similar to the first one, right? So it's
but there's a nuance, right? Because you have already prepared twice and now you prepare third time. But
okay. I see.
but it's really if you are prepared, then an exam loses its edge. Then the only problem is then how to prepare. We talk about that in a bit anyhow. But this is the most important thing, prepare. But you can also prepare mentally. Like, just imagine you are taking the exam and just imagine how it goes. And also the outcome. You can predict the outcome. Could be either way. You imagine, oh yeah, I passed it. You could also imagine, oh, I failed. Why not prepare also the worst case scenario that takes the edge off? Simply my experience. So I always advise to also imagine the bad outcome.
I totally agree with you. These three kind of preparations also remind me of ancient Stoic philosophy. I'm a fan of ancient philosophy. 3 parts of thinking about the exams that I also recommend my students to do. So the first one is what I call to pull the monsters from under the bed. So it's not preparation. I call it recognition. Like in anxiety is even worse than fear, because anxiety is about something you don't know. You don't know how it looks like. So it's like the monsters under the bed scaring the child, because the child doesn't know how these monsters look like. So the first thing you have to do is to pull them out so you can see how they look like. So the first thing to do is to look at the exam. So actually download the material, look at simulations, so that it's not just imagination, it's something you know. The second is preparing in the sense of imagining how it could go, or actually testing how it could go, and so on. And the third one is what the Stoics, the ancient philosophers, would have called meditatio malorum, so the meditation of bad things. What would happen if something went bad? So what would be the worst case scenario, as you said? Would I die if I fail that exam? Would the world explode? And thinking about consequences and make them very clear to yourself actually is really comforting, is really relaxing, because you realize that they are usually not tragic. So I love the 3 preparations. We have to find 3 different words though. So I don't know, recognize, prepare, and prepare for the worst. I don't know.
No, I stick to my 3 preparations. What other advice would you have regarding preparation?
Psychologically,
Yeah. What's the most important piece of advice you have for someone who has to take a language exam?
another good trick is ask yourself already when you will take the next exam. So approach the exam as if you were to fail, so that you allow yourself the possibility of failing, already planning for the next time that you will take the exam again and pass. So this takes a lot of pressure away from that moment, that date. And this is, of course, a privilege not everybody has. For example, when I took my German exams, if I had failed, I had to wait a whole year in order to try again and make my application for the university. So it would have cost me 1 year of studying. So it wasn't so easy to think, well, in 2 months I can do it again. But if you have the privilege also to be able to pay for another exam, that's a good trick. Put the money already to the side. So plan already you will pay those 200 euros more for the next exam. So you're prepared. You know you're ready to take the costs, and you take pressure away.
Or you don't even need that much money for a repetition, right? I would phrase it slightly different, but I agree absolutely. So simply think this first exam you take is an exploration of what does it look like, and so that you make yourself familiar with the actual situation. So you're just exploring, discovering what is expected in the real exam, which is the one after the first one. And if you're lucky, you already pass a part or 2 of that first exam. That means, depending on the exam you take, you might not have to redo them. You might just have to redo the ones you failed, and that saves you some money.
Or probably you pass the first time. So most people, even if they plan for a second time, they pass the first time. So it's not a problem. But you are mentioning something which is interesting. Before we go into practical tips for preparing for the exams, something a lot of students ask is, which exam should I take? Because you were mentioning the possibility of redoing just a part of the exam. And there are different exams for German certificates. And you're an expert in the field, so I will let you explain. And also, please try to answer the question most students ask: what is the easiest one? What is the best one? What should I take?
The easiest one is the one you can take, because depending on where you are living right now, there is limitations in regards of which exam to take. So there is, let's say, 4 or 5 big exams. The most known one is, of course, the Goethe Institute one. Goethe is called Max Müller-Bhavan in India. They have locations worldwide, and they allow modular taking of the exam. So you can do the reading part, the listening part, the writing part, and the oral parts all separately if you want. But the downside is they're not everywhere, usually in bigger cities. Plus, they are booked out months in advance, at least here in Berlin. So it's not that easy to really get a space there. The second most known should be TELC, T-E-L-C, which was created in cooperation with the Goethe Institute and the Volkshochschule, which is kind of a community college. They are also everywhere. Basically, every language school could apply to become a examination center. So there's plenty of those. The downside there is you can only take a written and an oral part separately, meaning oral part is only where you speak with the examiners and maybe a partner, and the written part is considered reading, listening, and writing, plus something called Sprachbausteine. I call that language elements, and that is quite a pain. We talk about that later. And then there is something called Österreichisches Sprachdiplom, ÖSD. I learned about that in Poland when I was working for the Austrian Language Institute. They are also in certain countries, and that's also a universally recognized certificate. And then there is something we call DTZ, Deutschtest für Zuwanderer, that is usually at the end of an integration course. You can take that. It's similar to the TELC, but it's a graded test, meaning they say you cannot fail. So if you don't reach a certain amount of points, you're just A2 instead of B1. But hey, if B2 is your goal, then you fail if you only get A2. Yeah, so I'm skeptical about this approach. And then there's a couple of exams in Switzerland, which I've recently dug into more deeply due to a client of mine. But the problem with these is that they are not internationally recognized, just in Switzerland. And in my experience, they were even worse in the sense of difficulty, which brings me back to the question, which is the easiest one. If you have a choice, my recommendation would indeed be the Goethe, if there is an appointment available, simply because it doesn't have the Sprachbausteine thing, which is a gap test. So you have a text and there's gaps, random gaps, at least random for you, and you need to figure out which word fits in there. It's a beautiful exercise and it really tests whether you know the language or not. But the problem is that very few people get more than 30% right of that thing. Yeah, so
it's very much based on grammar knowledge, right?
Grammar, vocabulary, but grammar helps a lot. If you know grammar, you know what kind of word fits into the gap, right? And maybe what case it is that helps to change the ending or pick the endings. There's 2 parts of that. One is a multiple choice, so there's a little bit of a chance to get that right. And the other one is just random words and plenty of blind words that do not fit in there, and they're just there to distract you. So beautiful as a challenge, but as someone who has to pass an exam, it's horrible. There's good news about that, though. It only makes for 10% of the score. So if you fail it, it's not the end of the world. Yeah, so that's also what I prepare you for. So I would go for the Goethe first, and then a TELC, ÖSD is the same. DTZ I wouldn't necessarily choose, but if it's there, there's no such thing as an easier exam. The modularity of an exam is something I would prefer.
What about DAF exam?
Test stuff.
Yeah.
Okay, there's 2 more, but they start B2 and higher. So that's the stuff. And the other one is DSH, Deutsche Sprachprüfung für den Hochschulzugang. So both are for university.
The one I took, yeah.
Which one did you take? DSH?
Yeah.
Yeah, but these are on B2, C1 level. People are torn between the 2. Hard to say. Both are valid. You have to look at the sample exam and see what resonates best with you. Yeah.
I remember I have chosen based on the dates when I could get it the earliest. So
it really depends on your preferences. Take a look at both and see how you feel. But content-wise, I wouldn't say any of those are easier.
This is all good advice. What I suggest when a student really can't choose is take the simulations for both, try them once, and choose what you like the most or where you felt more confident. And also, of course, taking an exam simulation is still a good exercise. So it's not you're wasting your time. Even if you take a fake exam in, for example, Goethe certificate, and then you decide to take the TELC, you're still training German at that level. So it's not wasted time. You're still training. So why not testing them both, right?
You read a text, you listen to a text and have to find the right information. You write a letter and you maybe speak to yourself. Hopefully you do that. So yeah, sure, it's absolutely good. And it's motivating if you realize you're learning something. If you do it right, if you prepare badly, then you will not feel much of a progress. Then you should call for help. Better call Michael. Yeah.
It's good. Better call Michael. What about the simulations, right? Because for me, these are really the most important piece of material one should get in order to prepare for a test, more important than any course or any other piece of advice. So the simulations, so the, how could we call them? The fake exams, the old exams.
Sample exams or model exams, I call them. Yeah.
So just for the listeners, we're talking about books you can buy for every kind of exam. And they're not so expensive, usually 20 euros, 30 euros max. And they contain 3 up to 5, usually, sample exams. There are also MP3 for the audio part, so that you can make a simulation of the exam. You can take the exam at home or with a teacher in order to prepare. So this is what we are talking about, just to make sure everybody is understanding. What do you think about them? Do you also use them intensively with your students?
Of course. Yeah, it's a must. If you have a sample exam, then you know what's coming. You see an exercise, you know, oh, I know this is what I have to do. And you also know a couple of pitfalls that might be hidden in there. So absolute must to use sample exams.
How do you recommend your students to use them? So do you have a specific plan or a pattern of use? Because I have one, but I was wondering, how do you recommend a student who is listening now to use these books to prepare themselves for the exam?
Yeah, I think I remember we talked about this a while ago, right? We're pretty similar there. So the first thing, I let everyone take one exam without any time pressure. So you just do whatever you can. Don't use the dictionary, or maybe even use the dictionary for the instructions only. Good enough for now. Note the time each part takes you, just to see how slow you are right now. So we can later see how you increase in speed. But the time doesn't matter. So normally you have a 30-minute limit for a certain task, for example. Or you can only listen to one audio once. That doesn't matter in the first taking of the trial exam. So you do that, and then we look at where you are. And after that, I show you how to work with the results, because you need to analyze your mistakes. First of all, you need to see your mistakes. Then you need to understand why they are a mistake. You need to learn how to deal with the answer key, which is in the back. So just correcting them and saying, oh, I got 5 out of 10 points, that's not enough. You need to really work with this, especially the listening part. Usually there's a transcription at the end of each audio. So if you look at the transcription, you should be able to find your mistake there. If you can't even do that, then possibly your German needs a little bit more training. Yeah, so you need to do the exam, correct it, look at your mistakes, try to hear and see your mistakes, and then we take another one and do basically the same. And at one point, I turn on the clock, say, okay, now let's take a look whether we can do it faster. But initially, the first couple of exams, I wouldn't bother with timing except writing it down. Anything I forgot? Anything you would do differently?
Pretty similar. The first time, exactly, I recommend to do the same thing. So to start without any time pressure, just in order to, recognition, right? To see how it looks like. And then right away, or by the second time, depending on how it went, to try to figure out which are the areas where the student needs more training. So talking to the students, if you realize that maybe listening is the part you're struggling with, then maybe take a couple of weeks to train your listening if you have the time. Or maybe it's reading, maybe it's grammar, whatever. Try to find what are your weak spots and try to train them a little bit more, a couple of weeks. And then you take the exam again. When you get to the point where you feel the exam is at your level, you have control over all the areas enough in order to pass, then I would start working with time. But not time in the sense of doing it just in time, but about wondering how can I maximize my efficiency in order to spare as much time as I can. Michael, you have a course about it. There are strategies. in order to make exercises faster and reduce the probability of making mistakes. These are things like, for example, by certain exercises, it's better to read the questions before you listen to the audio or read the text so that you already know what you want to find in the text instead of reading the text and then reading the questions and realizing that you have to read the text again. So these kind of little tricks so that you can maximize your speed and your probability of scoring a good score. And then at the very end, the last one or two simulations should be real tests, just the amount of time you would have, so that you also gain confidence because you know that at home you could pass that specific test in that specific time frame. And so you know that you can do it and you can go to exam feeling prepared. Yeah. This is the whole preparation path. Of course, the question is if the student has enough time to go through this whole process. If you have 1 or 2 months, there is more than enough time to do this. So to do the test first, then to work on weak points, then to do the simulations and so on. So this is what I would do.
Yeah, and there's quite a few little strategies that help you save precious time in an exam. And that is what it's all about. If you have time, you're at ease, you perform better. And then a little panic attack is fine. You can recover quickly. It's also natural that that might happen. Usually people have enough time to prepare for an exam. There is very few cases that justify rushing into an exam. Let's say you got a really spontaneous, beautiful job offer in Germany and it's next month, and sure, come on, let's push it. But in general, the preparation starts with planning. When do I take the exam? Or when do I take my German course? Or when do I reach this level? So ideally you plan, but not everybody is a planner. So I understand some decisions are not that thought through and you think, oh, let's do an exam next month, then you have to do the best you can. The good thing is you do not have to pass the exam with flying colors unless your ego really doesn't allow anything below 100% score. You only need to pass it with 60% score. And that's what I would also prepare my students for. Yeah, of course, 70%. So you have a little leeway between 60 and 70, but you do not need to ace the exam.
And as you said before, I just want to make it clear in case someone missed that. Modular exams allow you to fail just in a part in a module. For example, you could fail a reading part, and then you have to take just that part again. So you don't have to take the whole exam again. And this is important because, in my opinion, passing an exam or failing an exam is partially a matter of luck. So luck means many things, like how you feel that day, if you have a panic attack or not, but also if maybe that text is about a topic that you know better or a little bit worse, or if the accent of the audio listening is more similar to something you're used to or not, and so on. So there are certain factors. So it feels like a little bit of a roulette game of chance. And the fact that you don't need to repeat everything every time, it's very important. It's very relaxing, I think.
Yeah, that's a good decision from the Goethe to do that. Zach still has to work on that, but at least they have 2 parts you can do separately, right?
I know you have worked as an examiner for German tests, so I really look forward to hear your perspective as an examiner, judging us foreigner when we speak German. What about specific parts of the exam? You know, we have reading, listening, writing, speaking. Is there any specific tip to prepare for one of these sections, or something which is usually the hardest, or where you see your students struggle and you have advice for them to help them?
Sure, I have plenty of advice for every part, right? And all of that you find in my exam preparation courses. But so reading is the easiest part normally. The only thing that makes it a bit challenging is the time pressure. But in reading, one very important piece of advice: to not follow the instructions. Sometimes they say read all the questions, then the text, or read the full text, then the questions. Most of the time, this is nonsense. You do not need to read the full text. You do not need to understand every word in the text. You just need to pick out the information. Very often, that's very easily done by just comparing the word in the question with the word in the text. Later, the higher you get in the levels, the less that works. But let's say from A1 to B1, that's the strategy to go. Compare words, pick the word that's most likely the answer. You do a lot of elaborate guessing. but you don't need to read the whole text, which costs you a lot of time because you try to understand what you read. And every test contains words that you simply do not know. They are a little bit beyond your level because the task is not to understand the text, but to take out the information you need until B1. In B2, it gets a lot more challenging. There, you really need to know what you're doing. Yeah, there's not too much hacking there. That would be my reading advice. Maybe you share your advice for reading and then we go to listening.
No, I love this advice. Like, you have to play the game, right? This is a game of informed guessing. You don't have to understand every detail. I love your advice. Yeah, don't follow the instructions, right? These are a trick, a trap. Just learn how to play that game. Yeah, I agree.
Of course, you need to know what to do, but you have practiced before, so you know what to do by just glimpsing at the instruction and you know the pitfalls. Let's say there is one task without an answer. That's the thing you need to catch. But if you have prepared this plenty, then you know this already.
What about listening?
Yeah, listening is tough. Listening is one of the arts where most learners complain about because it simply takes time to recognize individual words, then also understand their meaning and put them together. It's all in your head. So I would never recommend anyone to just take an audio course in German, like Pimsleur or Michel Thomas or something like that, simply because you lack the visual input. We are all visual learners. No matter what you've heard somewhere, we all learn with our eyes. Reading is always the first thing you do, except as children, but let's not go there. That's a different podcast. We do not learn like children as adults.
I was thinking we will have to make episodes about adults and children learning and also about listening practice. So we'll not discuss how to practice listening here because I think it needs at least one episode just for this topic. How do you improve your listening skills, right? But this is a very interesting topic.
So 1.5 pieces of advice is basically similar to the reading part. It's not about you understanding every word or every sentence. It's really about recognizing a word you hear and looking at your exam sheet and finding it there, and then make an elaborate guess out of 3 answers. It's multiple choice. You never leave an answer unanswered or a task unanswered, never. Worst case you guess, it's a 33% chance of getting it right. And the other thing, listen for negations. Words like nicht oder außer, they might change the meaning.
Kein.
Yeah, kein, of course, yes.
Kein instead of ein. This is tricky for foreigners.
So there's a couple of things that turn the meaning of a sentence around and that might turn the answer. So these are 2 little tips that really make a difference for listening.
This one is actually very, very, very good tip. It's the same thing as for the drive license exam. I remember this was the trickiest part. You can oversee a little not, a little negation, and it turns the whole question around. So this is very important. My advice to prepare for the exam, so not listening in general, but just for the exam, would be to practice with audios really targeted for that level of language, because usually the vocabulary is redundant, is pretty much the same. So you can really practice that kind of audio, that kind of listening, that kind of vocabulary, instead of practicing maybe with podcasts, maybe with TV shows, maybe with general conversations that are not targeted to that specific vocabulary. This is something I'd recommend because, as you said, listening is very hard. Because you have to catch the words, understand them in real time. You don't have time to stop, think, reflect. So you have to be well trained for the listening part. Otherwise, it could really be the part you fail.
And just one question, what do you mean by redundant? Vocabulary is redundant?
I say is always the same words coming up, the same words being reused 90% of the time. So it's a specific subset of vocabulary for the exam. For example, Goethe Institute even gives lists up to B1, I think, lists of the most used words in their exams. And if you listen to the news in German, you will train with a list of vocabulary, which is huge because it's common spoken German. And you don't need that for the exam. You need to be able to recognize a smaller set of words.
I agree. News is a different vocabulary. It's focusing on certain forms of grammar. So news are not the best to prepare for A1 to B1. Try to find some easy stories, some simple podcasts if there are something like Coffee Break German or something. for example.
Yeah, use material for that specific level because that material will use that specific vocabulary. You need to be able to recognize very fast when doing listening for that level.
But the next question to that advice would be, where do I find this stuff?
Well, there are a lot of videos on YouTube with easy stories. There are the simulations, for example. You can buy one more book for another kind of exam on the same level where you find even more listening and more reading for that specific level. So everything which is marked with, for example, let's say A2 or B1. So take that level of exams and really get used to recognize those structures and those words. This is the only advice for focused listening training for the exams I can think of.
If you dig easy readers, by all means, go for it. But actually, I would just focus on sample exams, get as many as I can, invest $100 extra and get these books. And there's one book that even has 15 of them in there. And it's really worth the investment because you're investing in your future. And if you have to retake the exam, you pay more than you pay for these books. So if you somehow can scratch the money together, hopefully you can, just get them and work with these because that is the best preparation you can have. In general, reading stuff you enjoy is a good advice, but for exam preparation, it's exams that you use to prepare. Totally agree.
What about writing? Before we come to speaking, what about writing?
There's still Sprachbausteine to look at.
It's true. Let's start with that then.
Okay. So Sprachbausteine is really a challenge for pretty much everybody. They are only in Telg and DTZ. Goethe doesn't have them anymore. And thanks to Goethe, yeah, it was a good move. Simply because it's an overwhelming experience, not because the exercise isn't good. So honestly, I would prepare quick and dirty, see what you can get, put that in. Don't be bad about not getting more than 30%, because in the end, it only makes for 10% of your score. And if you get 30% of that, you already have 3% achieved, and that's more than enough. Don't overemphasize training on Sprachbausteine. Don't invest too much time. It's 10%. That means only 10% of your preparation should go into that part. It's the only exam advice I have. I have more detailed advice in my exam preparation courses because it is a beautiful exercise and there's a beautiful way to get above 50%, but that would lead too far here.
I don't have anything to add about that. I think it's a good piece of advice. Of course, if you are a grammar nerd and you really want to dig into it, but no, I wouldn't recommend it to do it for the exam. German grammar is a pleasure and has to be learned like that and not for an exam. And what about writing?
Writing is beautiful. I love writing and I love teaching writing. And it's really beautiful to see how people start. So I let them write first on their own without any advice. And usually they write like they've learned. You write in one piece of text. Yeah? I always tell them write one sentence per line and number each line. This is very crucial because one sentence per line means you can check that sentence and you can focus only on that sentence. You can even cover the other ones afterwards with a piece of paper if you want. But you focus on one sentence because there you can easily see where the verb is and what ending it is. Well, these are the two mistakes that really make the difference. The verb position and the verb ending. It needs to fit to the subject, the ich, du, er, sie. So yes. One sentence per line. The numbering is there because if you practice 10, 20, 30 letters, you will know that after 10 lines, I have reached my 80 words, which I need for the Goethe. Or my 12 lines for the Telg, which requires 120. And last piece of advice is writing. Only write as much as they want you to. Never give away more. It's not necessary. The more you write, the more mistakes you make. I guarantee you. Do not show off. Nobody cares how intelligent you are. Only you. In an exam, they want to read nice German. They want to see you got it. Possibly you might need help initially with the corrections. If I take a look at the letter, I see exactly what topic is not clear yet. And then we clarify that topic first, because if you do not understand what's happening here, you cannot write a letter without a mistake. And that is where grammar comes into play. And as Alessio said, it's a pleasure to do grammar. And grammar allows you to create an unlimited amount of correct sentences by just learning rules to be applied in every sentence.
Yeah. I like the advice also about numbering the sentences to easily calculate the number of words. Yeah.
Yeah, don't count words in an exam, please.
No, of course. It takes too much time. One thing I let my students train is to reread and try to correct themselves. Sometimes they write a sentence, they say something, and they want me to correct. And usually, when I see a mistake, I just say, there's a mistake. Read again and let's see if you can find it. And students can get used to do it, get better at finding out their own mistakes and correcting themselves. Not when talking, you also have to be confident and keep talking if you are talking. But when writing, if you reread what you wrote, try to find your mistakes, because during exams, this can be helpful. You can reread once and maybe you can find the mistakes.
Yeah, totally agree. A teacher that instantly corrects your letter is not a teacher. Yeah, I'm not sure what they are, but you never give away the gift to the student. The student needs to be able to at least have a chance to find their mistakes, and then if they can, show you help.
I think a lot of teachers want to be useful. And me personally, as a teacher or as a coach, I try to make myself useless. So to make the student so able to do things on their own and learn, reflect, correct themselves on their own, that I want to become useless. And I know you think the same about this topic. But a lot of teachers want to be helpful and are so eager to help that they offer the corrections a little bit too soon, in my opinion. So to the listeners, learn to correct yourself, and this will help you incredibly also during exams. Another thing which is more important later on, but you can start training it at the beginning of your learning journey, is learning certain patterns, sentence patterns, and just learning how to change words, like, for example, you change the verb, or you change the subjective, the pronouns, or you change the noun, the adjective, in order to reuse those patterns. And this gives you two advantages. So first thing, you can then use those patterns to compose sentences, of course, but also this trains your brain to those patterns. And so when you make a mistake, then you recognize it more easily because your brain tells you this doesn't fit the pattern. So to think in this pattern focused way really helps with writing, in my opinion. And I also like very much what you said. People remember, I don't want to give a grammar course here, but please remember, German really has this structure with these two parts of the sentence at the beginning in second position, and at the end, very importantly, at the end of the sentence, this Klammer structure, so these parentheses structures. And you really have to pay attention to these two parts of the sentence. So if you have those two places taken care of and everything is in the right position, then you already managed to get the 50% of your German right. So I love that. But what about oral exams? You're an examiner, you've worked as an examiner for oral exams. What is your experience in this domain? What are your pieces of advice for students taking oral exams in German?
The most important thing is to assume that the examiner wants you to pass. So he or she is not your enemy, but your friend. Of course, there's human beings involved, meaning some people might have a bad day and don't like your nose and then what to do. But then you try again. I've seen that with students of mine that went to one place and they failed and went to another just a week later and they passed because it was obvious the examiner was a bastard. So that is one thing. With that attitude, you can ask for help. You can say, I don't understand. What can I do? So learn a couple of crisis management questions like, Entschuldigung, das habe ich nicht verstanden, oder wie heißt das auf Englisch, oder was ist das? That's very simple stuff. But you're allowed to ask. You're allowed not to understand. The task is not for you to be perfect, but for example, to deal with not knowing. I'm talking about the lower levels, but even in B2, it is, of course, allowed to ask. I don't get that. Please explain. Yeah, it might be just one word you don't get. So have a conversation among friends. I don't know every word in English. Yeah, or I don't understand every word. So the higher you get, the more important communication gets. But also in the lower levels, there is a certain form of communication that you can practice and prepare. There's many other things. My favorite advice is to practice in front of a mirror, naked. There doesn't have to be anyone around. You just get naked, stand in front of a mirror, and you practice there your exam. Try that.
I never tried that.
Not sure whether anyone has ever done that. Yeah.
I never tried that. I heard about picturing the public to be naked in order to take pressure away. But practicing naked in front of a mirror, never try that. Maybe later I will try to see how I feel about it. But yeah, I understand what you're saying. Yes, it's true. If you don't understand the word, if you have to ask to repeat, that's not the reason why you're going to fail. Doesn't matter which level. So even C2, doesn't matter. They're going to test your ability to be understood and to understand and keep going with the conversation and get the things done with language that you're required to do. That's it. So yes, I totally agree with that. And I want to go back to the first thing you said because it's so true. And I remember I was surprised by how friendly, how much of an ally they were to me, the examiners by the German exams. Because my experience before had always been in school. And in school, even at university, there is this idea of, I want to find out if you haven't learned everything. They are way more aggressive and there is a lot more pressure. So it's not like teachers are your enemy. I don't think school teachers are your enemy. But there is this idea of really testing and find out if there is anything you don't know, if you weren't a good child, I don't know. But when you take an exam for a certificate, you are not in the same situation as in school. And they are way more friendly, helpful. They really want to find out if you can perform correctly. Not to find out if you could fail, but to find out if you can manage to do that task correctly, which may sound like a small difference to see if you can pass or to see if you can fail, but it makes a world of difference because they will help you accomplish your task. They will help you having a good conversation. And so, yes, you can consider the examiners your friends and wanting you to pass that exam. Yeah.
One last thing on this. Nobody cares whether you get the article endings right or the adjective endings in an oral exam until B1. Even in B2, I would say they're pretty forgivable. Whether you say den or dem, you wouldn't even hear the difference, possibly. So don't worry too much about that unless everything else is already sorted out.
What are the most important things?
Told you in the beginning. Verb ending, verb position. If you mess up the word position, my brain has to correct you all the time. I had a lecturer at university back then. Man, that man put every verb in the wrong direction. And my brain was getting tired after 5 minutes of listening to it because I was constantly correcting his German in my brain. So verb position, verb ending. If that is correct until B1, that is the one thing to focus on. In B2, you need to go a bit beyond that. But you never have to really box sentences complicatedly. Never, not even in C2. I wouldn't really do that. Yeah, like one Hauptsatz, one Nebensatz does the job until the end.
This is the same advice you gave before for writing, right? To take care of the position of words in the sentence, especially the verbs. And now we're talking about speaking, and this is as much important as by writing, right? Put the words in the right position more than the endings, which of course are important in German. We don't want to say we should ignore the declensions, but positions are way more important. Yeah, I totally agree. Yeah.
One more thing. Don't worry too much about pronunciation. Unless I really can't make out any word that comes from your mouth, pronunciation will not be your problem. Not even in C2. Of course, if you mispronounce every second word, yeah, but I doubt that you make it up to that level then. So no need to be self-conscious about how you sound. You sound fine, normally.
I want to go back to the second things you said, and I want to stress it even further. To build short, simple sentences. This is something I notice so often. Students try to make too complex of a sentence. So they start wanting to use subordinate clauses. They want to put too many words in the same sentence. And the problem there is that very often they are translating from their own language. So they are thinking concepts in their own language, so with rich, complex sentences they would use as adults, and then ask themselves, how would I transform this in a German sentence? But this is a very bad way to approach this. A lot of people say it's important to learn to think in the foreign language, but nobody explains what it means to think in a foreign language. This could be a topic for a podcast. But one of the things you have to learn is how to think at your language level. So you have to learn how to think in simple German so that you can speak in simple German. So if you're able to build short sentences, you have to break down what you want to say in short, simple sentences and use them. Never attempt to make things more complex of what you can handle. Sometimes I let my students train this in their native language. So we have a short conversation in English, for example, where they cannot use any subordinate clause. You break down a sentence complex from the point of view of grammar in single small blocks. And if you learn how to think and talk like this, then you can learn how to think correctly in order to speak in a foreign language, in this case, German. And this is how you should try to speak in German. As you said, never try to impress your examiner. Never try to impress your examiner by using anything complex, because it would probably backfire and you will get a lower score.
I agree. I like that exercise as well. And I recently also talked to a client who took an exam in Switzerland, right? And he always wanted to make more complex sentences. And I said, you don't even speak like this in English. You really have to learn how to express yourself in German. And that's vastly different from English at times, unless you keep it very simple.
How you build complexity in a language is different from language to language. When you try to translate complexity from one language to the other without being already very proficient in that language, that usually brings to disasters. So keep it simple, guys. Keep it simple.
Even I just recently looked at a C1 exercise about transformation, like transforming nouns to verbs and the other way around, nominalization. So how to express one sentence in a different way. And man, I struggled with this. I'm not sure whether I would always get it right. Yeah, so there is layers of complexity in every language that overwhelm even a native speaker. But again, this is higher level. So until B1, you don't have to worry about that. Keep it simple.
I think we are coming to an end because we wanted to discuss psychology at the end, but we did it before. And we went through all the parts of a German exam. And is there anything we forgot? Any piece of advice we forgot to mention?
Basic stuff. Be on time, very much on time, and don't stuff yourself with stuff that makes you high and lets you drop very quickly.
Some people forget to breathe. So you have to breathe while taking an exam, right? It seems stupid, but it's very important. Some people stop breathing. So breathe.
That takes years to accomplish, right? I didn't start breathing right away. It took me 9 months to breathe on my own.
True.
There is so much gold already in this last hour, but if you are interested in more, I have A1 and B1 exam preparation courses which share my wisdom of many, many years of taking all sorts of exams, but above all, training people for these exams.
For the higher levels, for C1 and especially C2, if you want to reach that level, then my grammar course, always on Smarter German, my grammar course will help you understand the most complex structures and really understand them. I mean, can help before, of course, but for those levels, it's really important. When I had to take those exams, I didn't have a course like the one I created. And those structures weren't easy at all. And they gave me some nightmares.
Even in B2, I love this course. And even, let's say, A2, if you have time left, because it's a pleasure. I worked through the course with Alessio, and man, grammar is such a pleasure. I also have my own take on many things, but we click when it comes to grammar and the love for it. So it's a delight to be able to understand how a language works. Any language can be beautiful if you take it apart.
I like German grammar better than English grammar, and even better than Italian grammar. But, well, then, of course, the last thing, please, everybody listening, if you are going to take an exam or just took an exam or preparing, or if you have any questions, or if you want to share your experience, if you have questions or idea for future topics you want us to discuss, please let us know. Write us.
And if you pass an exam, share the score with us, right? Don't share anything personal with us, but we want to hear how you passed it. And if you failed it, share with us why you failed, like what happened there, like what went wrong. Maybe we have a piece of advice for you. So share. Sharing is caring.
Thank you, Michael, for sharing this time with me and with us.
Thanks, Alessio. A pleasure. Thanks, audience, as always.
Bye, everybody.
Have a lovely day.